Fluttershy let out a soft sigh as she lay on the floor of the examination room. A towel was draped over her head, and she breathed slowly, trying to calm herself down and feel better. She had redressed her wounds. Her cuts had reopened in the water, and were slowly healing again. Her muscles still ached, though the health drinks had helped a lot. Her shivering had gone away as well, a sign her body temperature was returning to normal. She had made a makeshift fire with some of the leftover gauze and bandages, using a small bit of lantern oil to help burn. The fire had provided her with a gentle comfort, warming her body and calming her mind as if the flames, or as they danced before her. It wouldn't last for long, but it was serving its purpose. She had hung her bag to help it dry quicker, as well as getting the water out of the music box. She was surprised she hadn't lost the doll key in the watery mess, though the map of Ponyville hadn't fared as well. It was drying as well, though it would never quite be the same. I wonder what Rainbow Dash and Pinkie Pie are doing right now, Fluttershy asked to herself, staring at the flames. She was feeling lonely without her friends, and she was starting to worry about their safety. This place wasn't welcoming. Already she had brushed with death twice, and both times she had been saved thanks to Rainbow Dash. Rainbow Dash, she muttered quietly, closing her eyes to think about her mare friend. This is it! This is my chance! Rainbow Dash squealed happily as she held up a poster to Fluttershy. The Wonderbolts will be having open auditions in 3 months! This is the first time they've ever done this! Apparently, they've been so amazed at the talent of upcoming flyers that they want to see and personally invite the best of the best to join them. Rainbow Dash let out another squeal as she was practically dancing for joy. That's wonderful, Rainbow Dash! Fluttershy cheered happily for her. You'll finally be able to make your dream come true. I know! Oh, I'm going to have to pick up my practice lessons. This is going to call for some new tricks, too. Tricks no pony has ever thought of. The most death-defying and out-of-this-world tricks any pony has ever seen. Rainbow Dash instantly contemplated anything and everything she could do. You shouldn't forget about using the Sonic Rainbow either. You're the only pony in all of Equestria who can perform it. They let you in for sure after they see that, Fluttershy happily said. Rainbow stopped her musing when Fluttershy said that, lowering a hoof she had been raising eagerly to the ground. The Sonic Rainbow, huh? Rainbow scoffed her hoof against the ground, looking a little anxious. What's the matter? Fluttershy asked, noticing the instant change in behavior. Well, to be honest, I haven't been able to perform the Sonic Rainbow since the Best Young Flyers competition. Rainbow Dash seemed to grimace at her mention of failing to do a move. Really? Do you not remember how to perform it? It's not that I forgot how I did it, just for some reason, some things seem to get too real, just as I'm about to perform it. The ground gets too close, or I start to panic about my not controlling my speed, or I think that it must be something to perform only on critical occasions, or... Rainbow Dash's frantic rant was interrupted when Fluttershy's lips found their way to Rainbow's. Rainbow's face lit up in a blush at this. I know you can do it, Rainbow Dash. I believe in you. Fluttershy smiled warmly at her mare friend. Well, I suppose I can always give it another try, Dash said, grinning as she blushed heavily. She spread her wings and shot into the sky at a mighty speed. Fluttershy smiled as she watched her, always loving the way Rainbow flew. Rainbow perched herself high up on a cloud, looking over the world. With a quick breath, she sprang up into the air once more, flying around as she began to build up momentum. Fluttershy watched her fly around, realizing Dash was getting a feel for the air first, before Dash stopped high up in the air, almost invisible against the sun. Then she saw the descent. Rainbow was racing straight for the ground at a tremendous speed. Fluttershy watched in anticipation as she could see Rainbow begin to form the cone of air around her body. Fluttershy almost held her breath. For a moment, it seemed like Rainbow hesitated. Fluttershy could see the change in her flight. She put a hoof to her mouth out of hesitation that she might go flying backwards, as she had done so many times before. But, at the last moment, it seemed like a last-ditch determination fired in her eyes, and her body stretched forward, and suddenly, boom! A huge explosion ripped through the sky. A circle of color spreading out through a rainbow shot towards the ground, turning right before it would impact with the ground, and rocketing into the sky, spreading a giant rainbow across the sky. Fluttershy cheered, jumping up and down at the amazing sight. Wait a moment. An explosion. Fluttershy's head popped up from where she had been laying on her hooves. The one that woke me up earlier. That sounded a lot like the sonic rain boom. Now, she was worried. The reason that Dash... Well, what reason could Dash have for doing the sonic rain boom here? Unless... Oh no. Was Dash being chased by the dragon again? Fluttershy's heart started pounding. She could be hurt, or trapped, or worse. Her heart lodged into her throat as she stood up quickly, shaking her head, trying to hear her mind, as her towel fell to the floor. No, I can't think that way. Rainbow Dash is okay, and I'm sure Pinkie Pie is too. I just have to find them. Fluttershy looked at what remained of the fire before her. It was flickering with its last embers. It would die out very soon. Okay, I should be dry enough, and my things should be dry enough as well. It's time for me to find a way out of here. I have to find my friends. Fluttershy quickly packed up her things and put them back into the slightly damp bag. She made sure to pack some of the extra gauze, bandages, and health drinks as well, making sure she'd have enough for more medical supplies, should anything happen along the way. This would have to do for now, as she closed it up and placed it back into her bag. She then returned the lantern to around her neck and turned it on, making sure that it still worked, before walking out into the hallway. Instantly, the music box began to hiss and wail the sound of buzzing bees, as the air seemed to become thick. Fluttershy instantly had to struggle for breath, as it felt like the air itself was pressing down hard against her body, trying to strangle the life out of her. Her body felt almost frozen, as the pressure felt like it was trying to crush her body. Her head slowly turned, looking down the hallway from where it felt like the pressure was emanating. Her eyes grew wide, and her pupils shrunk, as she could see two piercing red eyes staring back at her. It was a tall, pony-like creature, one that could easily overpower her. Its body was covered in darkness that seemed to flow and crawl all around it, almost like dancing flames. As it stared at her, its mouth began to open, revealing a white mouth in stark contrast to its black body. Its jagged, sharp teeth bared for her to see. It was grinning at her. It began to walk towards her, each step echoing with a loud thud in the hallway. As it drew closer, the air grew thicker, and its presence, seemed to crush her further. The very air pressed down on her, making her legs shake, and her breathing stop as her heart pounded heavily in her chest. As it grew closer, a word began to echo through Fluttershy's mind. Pain. This creature would bring her pain. She had to run from it. She had to get away. But her hooves felt glued in place. Pain. Pain. Pain, 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 pain. Pain, pain, pain. Why couldn't she run? She had to run. Was she going to die if she didn't run? But she was paralyzed by fear. Fear of what? The wrath of this creature? That's what she had to run away from. I need you to be strong right now, all right? Fluttershy's mind snapped back to reality, instantly turning on her hooves and running as fast as she could. She was finally able to get air into her lungs as she quickly ran past the doors around her. The hallway was quickly coming to an end, though, and before her, she could see the staircase into the second floor. She couldn't stop now. She had to run. Her hooves hit heavily against each step as she ran up the stairs. She seemed to be getting further away from the creature. The air was breathable, and she wasn't feeling the soul-crushing presence. The music box was slowly growing more quiet. She reached the top of the stairs, panting, as she took in the stale air. The world still smelled of mildew and rotting materials, but it was better than being in that creature's presence. She quickly began to walk down the hallway to the second floor, when her music box suddenly began to hiss again. She stopped in her tracks, expecting that black creature to appear before her. But slowly coming into view of her lantern wasn't the black creature. It looked like a nurse. It was wearing the standard Cloudsdale Hospital nurse uniform, a pink hat with a red cross, and a pink coat that fitted well around the body, but ended just short of the flank so that the cutie mark could be seen, with white stockings on the hind legs and a special-made hoof sandals to keep their steps quiet for patients. However, that's where the similarities ended, for the face of the nurse was covered in bandages, hiding its eyes and face, but around its mouth was a metal muzzle with holes for air, but looked like it had been placed to keep the creature quiet. Its uniform was covered in spots of blood, as if it had been attacked by something, while its white tail seemed spotless. But most striking of all was that around its neck it wore what looked like a black necklace of living flames, as if it had come from the body of the creature before. Her music began to hiss louder as the creature drew closer. Her head looked back and forth, looking for a way out that didn't involve going back the way she'd come. Her eyes fell upon double doors just in front of her and to her right. She jumped at the doors and pressed on them, praying that they were open. The doors swung open, and she ran inside, closing them behind her. The hissing of her music box died down a little, as she could still tell the creature was nearby outside. She hoped it wouldn't come breaking the door down, but she now realized she had just set herself up in a trapped room. She had jumped into what looked like a supplied closet. However, most of the supplies had fallen into this world's rotten disrepair. Moths flew around the ceiling of the room, as she could smell blood in the air, but couldn't see any. She looked around, seeing if there was anything that could possibly hide her or keep the creature behind the door away from her. Something glinted against the glare of her lantern on one of the shelves. Huh? She slowly walked over to the glint of light. It was an orange gemstone in the shape of an eye. It was the only thing in the entire room that hadn't fallen into the state of rotting. In fact, it looked pristine, as if it had been taken care of while everything else fell apart. Something about the gem drew Fluttershy to it, as if it was hypnotizing. The jewel itself seemed to be watching her. She gulped down her beating heart, and placed the gem carefully in her bag. She'd hold on to it. She felt it was important. She slowly walked back over to the door, and placed her ear against it, trying to hear anything. The hissing of her music box had gone silent, and she didn't hear anything past the door. She opened the door carefully, peeking outside and looking around. The nurse had left. It didn't seem like it had tried to chase after her and break the door down. Fluttershy let out a soft sigh in relief, realizing this. She exited the supply room and continued down the hallway from the direction the nurse had come. She felt very strongly about not returning the way she had just come from. Moving forward was her only option now. Fluttershy looked around carefully at the doors in the hallway. Many had been boarded up with wooden planks nailed to the frames, making sure no one could enter or exit the rooms. Many looked like they had been sealed with some kind of building material, while others just looked like the locks and handles had been broken for ages and wouldn't open. The hallway ended abruptly with a turn, Fluttershy turning with it to continue down the hall. Something immediately struck her eyes as she walked down the hall. She drew closer to it to get a better look at it, when she stopped and stared in surprise. On the wall opposite the door was a giant mural of Princess Celestia. She was facing the pony looking at the mural, with a hoof raised and wings spread out, with an imposing look about her. Above the mural, in large letters, looked like a quote she had once said. "Life is the right of every pony. May we all bask in the light together. Fluttershy blinked in awe at the mural. She had never seen it before. Not in all the years that she'd been to the hospital, at least. Not to mention, something struck her as being odd about the mural, as if something was missing. Her eyes! Her eyes were missing. In their place were indentations in the wall, looking as if something was supposed to be placed inside of them. Fluttershy carefully picked out the orange stone she had found in the supply closet and carefully fit it into the right eye socket. The stone fit in with a click and stayed in place. Now, Celestia was missing only one eye. It was likely that the other eye was somewhere in the hospital. Suddenly, the note from the front desk made sense to her. They had locked away the other eye somewhere because Celestia's staring was judging them, as if the mural itself could see something that they didn't want it to see. Fluttershy put a hoof to her chin and thought, "So, I have to find where they locked the gem away, and the only hint I have is the word hide." Fluttershy looked around the dark hallway once more, before quickly settling back down to the way she was heading. She looked even closer at the doors now, looking for any door that might have some sort of keypad, or be open for her to check and see if it would reveal some kind of locked item. Even after another turn in the hallway, none of the doors revealed any answers, before opening up to a staircase, heading back down to the first floor. She treaded carefully, expecting another creature to start heading for her if she wasn't careful. The world remained silent, though, and she came upon a hallway that she recognized from when she was a filly. It was the testing wing of the hospital, one she remembered frequenting a lot with her mother when she was getting help. It was quite nostalgic. She began to check some of the doors in the hallway. One door opened for her as she walked inside. "Mother!" came the voice of a little filly. Fluttershy stepped back in shock as she looked at what was happening before her. A ghostly image of her mother was lying on the bed in the room, as a filly version of herself ran up happily next to her bedside. "Fluttershy, you came to visit again." Her mother chuckled happily, leaning down to pick up the little filly, hugging her close as she lay in the bed. "Of course, Mother. You know I'll always visit you." Fluttershy chuckled happily as her mother's hair tickled. "When are you coming home, Mother? I miss you." "As soon as the doctors finish their testing today." Her mother smiled happily. "Really?" Fluttershy's face lit up happily. "Really." Her mother chuckled happily at her daughter's enthusiasm. "They say, unless it's serious, I can head home today, since I'll have your father at home to take care of me. We're so lucky to have him." She smiled. "Dad's the best doctor in the whole world. He'll make you all better in no time." Fluttershy smiled happily. "Indeed he will." Fluttershy's mother smiled happily, before turning her head and coughing into a hoof, away from her daughter. "You really should be resting," came a deeper voice. The two girls turned to see an older Pegasus with a doctor's coat walk into the room. "Daddy!" Fluttershy turned happily. "Hello, dear." Her mother smiled. "Hello, you two." He smiled and walked closer. "How are you feeling today?" "Better. My stay here helped, but I'm eager to get home and be with my little one." Mother smiled, rubbing Fluttershy's head happily. "You'll be resting there too, you know. You may not feel better, but... you may feel better, but you're not cured yet. But we'll find the cure. Don't you worry." Her father smiled. He looked tired, like he hadn't gotten a good night's sleep in a long while. "I know you will, dear. We'll be a happy family again before too long," her mother said happily, before the images faded away. Fluttershy didn't know what to make of the images. After they had gone, the room had returned to the state of decay as the rest of the hospital was in. The furniture and cloth was destroyed and old, with the smell of mildew hitting her nose. "Mother," Fluttershy said quietly. She remembered that memory now, though when she had tried to remember it before, it was hazy, but now it was coming in clear as could be. She wondered why. What reason her memories would have for hiding her mother until they showed up like this. She looked a little closer at the room, but nothing else seemed to pop out of her. She frowned a little, hoping she'd find more to remember, but it didn't seem like she'd be offered any. She slowly turned back to the door and walked down to the hallway. She let out a soft sigh as she tried to gather her thoughts and try to calm down. She walked further down the hall before her eyes caught a sight of a sign that was lit up above double doors. The sign read, ER. She hesitated a moment. She hadn't been in the ER section of the hospital before, and she was worried about what she would find. However, she gulped down her fears and quickly entered the double doors. She looked around, not seeing any creatures, but the scent of blood caught her nose. She looked down at the ground and saw a trail of blood leading down the ER's hallway, as if something had dragged a pony's body down it. Her gut told her that following the trail was the right way to go, but she dreaded what she would find. She didn't want to see a bleeding corpse. With another gulp, she began to follow the trail of blood. The trail led under a door at the end of the hallway, a door that looked like it was used for surgery. She carefully pushed the door open and walked into the room. It was indeed a surgery room. Torn apart private curtains hung like from rusted metal rails. A window for observation was broken on one side of the room. A tray filled with rusted medical items lay near the broken table, and various machines and devices lay in various pieces around the room. The disinfecting sink was coated with a layer of blood. The blood trail ended in the middle of the room, leading to a large pool of blood that lay just underneath the surgical table. On top of the table was a wooden blood-stained box with a padlock on it. The padlock had a dial on it for turning numbers to open it. Fluttershy carefully walked up to the box and examined it, before noticing a bit of extra blood on the table that had been forming the words. Turn, turn, turn the letters into numbers. The last word was smudged, but it all had been written in blood. She was surprised it wasn't more smudged. She carefully placed a hoof against the padlock and looked at the 4 dials on it. Each dial went from 1 to 9, creating 4-digit number code to unlock the box. The note said that the code was the word hide, and the words here say something about turning the letters. Fluttershy thought quietly for a moment, trying to tell her brain what it meant. Suddenly, it seemed to come to her as she placed her hoof against the dial and began to turn the numbers. 8, 9, 4, 5. She said out loud as she turned all the numbers to what she thought might be the right combination. The padlock clicked, releasing its iron grip on the wooden box. Fluttershy smiled happily at her own ingenious, before carefully moving the padlock aside to open the box. Inside, she saw what she had expected, the other gem that was Celestia's eye, though this one was a darker shade of blue instead of the orange that was her other eye. Fluttershy carefully put the jewel inside of her bag, ready to leave the surgical room. She turned and exited the room, only to be met with a loud hissing of her music box once more. Her head instantly looked down the hallway, seeing the same kind of nurse heading towards her, blocking off the path of the hallway. Fluttershy looked around, not sure what to do, not wanting to get attacked, but having nowhere to run. She did the only thing she could do, and pressed herself up against the wall, with what she very slowly began to walk towards the nurse, hoping the nurse would ignore her and let her slip by. The nurse's head turned to snap and look at Fluttershy, as she got almost side by it. Fluttershy stopped in her tracks, as the nurse stopped as well. The nurse seemed to be staring at Fluttershy through its bandaged face. Fluttershy couldn't see the eyes, but she knew they were staring deeply at her. Fluttershy stared back in return, as she could feel the cold sweat beginning to form on her forehead. The two of them were in a standoff. and Fluttershy didn't want to be the first pony to make a move. The tension was thick, only cut by the hissing of the music box, telling Fluttershy that she was in danger. The nurse finally, but slowly, turned its head away from Fluttershy, before walking past her, heading for the surgical room Fluttershy had just come from. Fluttershy let out a soft sigh from the air that she had been holding in from the tension. The nurse turned around instantly, as it suddenly let out a wailing, ear-piercing cry. Fluttershy jumped, running out of the ER hallway as fast as she could. She turned down the testing hallway, running straight for the stairs to the second floor, when her music box hissed even louder as she hit a wall of thick air that squeezed down on her as if trying to suffocate her. She skidded to a stop as her whole body felt terror. The dark creature was standing before her once more. It roared at her with its white mouth open, the jagged teeth coming down swiftly. Fluttershy's instinct reacted, and she raised a hoof to defend herself. The jagged teeth bore down onto her leg, and Fluttershy let out a scream in agony, as if it felt like her flesh was on fire. The dark creature twisted its head before quickly snapping it back, picking up and tossing Fluttershy by her leg. Fluttershy slammed into a wall, the air escaping her lungs as pain soared throughout her. She coughed and gagged in the thick air as the dark creature began to walk closer to her, wanting to strike out once more. Fluttershy scrambled to her legs, her injured legs slipping, causing her to crash face first onto the floor, eliciting another yelp as her bruised face was struck. She managed to turn her head to look at the creature through blurry, tear-filled eyes. It was drawing too close. She had to escape. She had to get up and run. Instinct struck again, as her wings spread out and she flapped them desperately, trying to pick her body up and get away. Get away quickly. She had to get to the mural of Celestia. Jagged teeth bore down on her wing. Fluttershy screamed even louder than she had before, her sensitive wing being punctured in several places. The dark creature twisted its head again, though this time a loud crack was heard as the bone in her wing snapped. Fluttershy's body flailed once more as her screams echoed through the hallway. The dark creature let go of the maimed wing, seeming to grin happily at its accomplishment. As tears streamed down her face, her legs finally found traction. She put all of her strength and focus into running, wanting nothing more than to put distance between her and the dark creature. Her vision was blurry, with pain and tears, making it hard for her to see where she was going. She smacked into the end of a hallway, crying in pain as pain shot through her body from the force of the impact. She shakily looked down the hallway, seeing the blurry outline of the dark creature heading straight for her, continuing its slow pace. She reached her good hoof out in front of her, and found a door before her. With haste, she opened it, stumbling out. She quickly blinked, whirling her head around. She was on the other side of the lobby. She knew where she was. She could go through the other door, and make it up the stairs, and then she could get to the mural. Her music box had yet to cease its hissing, as a figure came into her blurry vision. Fluttershy turned and ran, only looking back to see the blurry outline of a nurse that had been walking towards her. She tripped against the receptionist's chair that lay scattered behind the desk. She didn't have time to let the pain settle in. She had to get up. She scrambled back to her feet and reached the door. The moment she entered the hallway to the patients' rooms, another ear-piercing wail cried out. Fluttershy turned just barely in time to see a nurse raising up her hind legs, as the front legs came rushing straight towards her. Fluttershy felt her hooves strike her face, as she was sent tumbling back into the wall. She panted as she got back up and tried to look around. She could no longer see out of one eye. Only half the world came into her vision. She met out the image of the nurse walking towards her, barely even giving her time to realize she'd been hit. Fluttershy pushed off against the wall and ran past the nurse wailing at her as she ran by. She could barely see. Her hoof hit the staircase with a thud, sending her face into the stairs once more. Her head was throbbing so much she wasn't even sure what was happening to her body anymore. She only knew she had to get up and keep moving. She had to get to the mural. It was her way out. It had to be her way out. She climbed the stairs to the second floor. She wasn't even sure how she did it, but she had managed it. She kept running. She wasn't even sure how she was keeping up pace with her body, but her legs were running. She made the turn down the second floor hallway, and the blurry image of the mural was in her sight. She ran straight for it, skidding to a stop right before it. The music box let out a loud hiss as the air began to feel thick. Fluttershy reached into her bag and pulled out the blue eye. The air began to feel like it was pressing down on her, going to crush her body. She fumbled with the eye, fumbling to put it into the right slot. It nearly fell from her hooves. She shifted it hastily into place. She couldn't breathe. The air and pressure was too strong. She swore she could feel breath on the back of her neck as the blue gem clicked into place. The two gems let out a bright light as a loud cry came from her side. The mural began to move, disappearing into the wall. In its place was another dark hallway. Fluttershy ran for it. She ran through the hallway, running away from the pressure and the thick air. It was chasing her. The creature was following her down the long hallway. Her chest was once more on fire, but she couldn't stop. An office opened up at the end of the hallway. A simple office. A desk, a filing cabinet, chairs, office space. Fluttershy crashed into a desk, throwing her hooves over it as she panted in desperation. Her vision was impaired so much now that she could only just make out the outline of the furniture of the office. The air grew thick once more, and she turned her head in fear, watching as the dark creature was drawing closer. Its blood-covered smile and jagged teeth shone underneath its red, glaring eyes. She couldn't see anything but its face. Her breath sounded loud. Her panting was as loud as a beating of her heart in her ears. There was no escaping it this time. The mural had led her to a dead end. There was no escape now. Her vision was filled with the dark creature. It was going to kill her. She would die here, and her friends would never know what happened to her. She muttered an apology under her breath as her face continued to be drenched with her tears. The creature was upon her, and her breathing stopped. The pressure of the creature's presence was enough to feel like it would stop her heart. It opened its mouth as it was going to bore its fangs down once more on her. It stopped. The creature had stopped moving. Something had forced the creature to not kill her. Fluttershy meekly stared at the creature, not understanding what was happening. It had the opportunity to kill her. Why wasn't it taking it? Her ears twitched as she heard her reason. Somewhere in the distance, a siren was going off. The dark creature before her began to disappear, as if the siren was calling it forth and summoning it back. The darkness that surrounded the creature's body seemed to burn up. The entire creature went up in a black fire before her, disappearing before it could finish her. The music box ceased its hissing as the creature vanished, leaving her in the office by herself. A loud click could be heard before the sound of something crashing to the ground. Fluttershy's mind was hazed over. She could barely see. She couldn't understand what was going on, but she dragged herself over to where she had heard the sound. Her body moved on its own now, without her guidance. Her body stepped on top of a platform, one she was sure hadn't been there when she'd entered the room. She felt her body collapse on top of it, lying herself down as she panted. The platform began to move. She wasn't sure how or why, but she didn't care. It was moving up, and it was taking her away from the hospital. The platform was moving into the ceiling, through a dark path that she couldn't see what was around her, but she knew she wasn't around danger anymore. The pain was becoming real to her now. Her face came to her attention first. She could feel a swelling around her eye. She was probably also bleeding a lot from her face, but it was hard to tell. Her leg was no longer useful. Using it so heavily in her panicked state while it was injured, it had gone completely numb to her. She had probably done irreversible harm to it. It probably would never work the same again. She could barely make out the blood pouring from it. Her wing. The creature had snapped her wing, broken it. She couldn't help but remark at that. Pegasus' wings are strong and sturdy. One could not normally break it with a twist of the head. They weren't like birds' wings, that were fragile. They were strong enough to lift the entire body of a pony, but hers were now broken. She wasn't sure if it could get fixed or not. The one thing she knew about broken wings was that they could break in two ways. A way that they could be used again, or a way in which they could never be useful again. There was very little leeway. Her thoughts were distracted when the platform came to a stop. It had reached its destination. She panted heavily. Her body wanted to collapse, absorb the pain that was trying to drive her mad. The only thing that kept her sane was the thoughts of what damage had been done to her and what she could do to fix it. But she knew she had to at least get up. If she didn't get up, she couldn't start fixing her wounds. She tried to stand up. She put energy into her legs, but they refused to stand. She carefully blinked her one useful eye, trying to open it more than it was, but it refused against her actions. She tried to flap her good wing, but it was pressed down hard against the platform by her body. She panted, but she was too tired to panic anymore. She was yelling at herself to get up, but her body was refusing now. Oh man, that was a good one! Pinkie giggled happily. Fluttershy's eyes closed tightly, wanting to escape the pain with sleep, but she forced it open. Ha ha ha! Man, you pull the best pranks, Pinkie Pie! Rainbow Dash laughed alongside the pink pony. Her good front leg lifted weakly off her body, as she very carefully placed a hoof against the ground. That was pretty funny. Fluttershy giggled, covering her mouth with her hooves. Her legs started to lift the front of her body up. Her body jerked in refusal, but she held herself up. Her back legs began to weakly move now. I told you you'd enjoy yourself, Rainbow said, grinning, putting a hoof over Fluttershy's shoulder. Her back legs slowly moved, placing their hooves against the ground. She lifted herself up. She was standing now. She could feel herself dripping. She was losing blood. It's all in good fun, after all. Pinkie laughed, bouncing up to Fluttershy. After all, who doesn't love to share a good laugh? She grinned brightly. On 3 legs, she slowly began to walk. She didn't know where she was going yet. She could feel the need to go forward. You're right. I'm still not sure that I'm that good at them, but I love doing them with you two. Fluttershy smiled happily. She loved being around her friends. They gave her such strength. She didn't know what she'd do without her friends. Fluttershy stopped before a mirror. She could see herself now. She could see the bruised half of her face swelling around her eye, the maimed wing, the bleeding leg. She was a mess. With very careful precision, she dropped her saddlebag to the ground. Using her good hoof, she opened the bag and pulled out a health drink. She very carefully swallowed its bitter contents before placing it down. She then grabbed the bandages in her bag and carefully began to wrap the wounds of her leg. I think that's enough for one day, but we should totally do this again. Rainbow Dash grinned at Fluttershy. Oh, yes, I'd love to. Doing this again would make me happy. Fluttershy grinned happily. She could ask for nothing more than to spend a day in the loving care of her friends.